So, if we're going to look at the history of money, then we're going to also look at the history of monetary systems. And because the US dollar is the dominant currency in the world, the history of the US dollar and our monetary system is pretty essential to understanding finance in any regard. And also, the issues that the United States has worked on are kind of archetypal, so they relate to every kind of culture, every kind of monetized culture, which is most of them now. So, um, by the early part of the 1900s, the United States had become a much more industrialized country. We're moving from an agrarian culture to an industrial culture, and uh, the evolution of factories and the idea of mass production of goods that fit hand in glove with the notion of capitalism. But it also exacerbated a lot of challenges because now, again, just like kings and serfs, now we have sort of the industrial kings, a guy like Henry Ford, and the workers in the factories, and there's this imbalance of power. And now, one thing the merchant class needs is a stable currency. Wildly fluctuating currency valuations are bad for business, and the challenge in any kind of large civilization is that the power focused part of the culture, they're the militarized power, which is the political side, right? That's the military power side of culture. They will do whatever it takes with the money supply to execute their military dramas. So there's a natural conflict between the merchant class and the political class, even though there's a lot of crossover. The in the United States began really looking at these issues. Who should control the money supply? Because when the money supply is out of control, it's very difficult to operate business, as we're saying. Also, in the early evolution of our culture, our monetized culture in the U.S., there were state banks, there were independent banks, so there was no real glue between these entities, and you had wildly varying policies, multiple currencies, and because of industrialization, interstate commerce was really starting to take off. If you again think of, say, the Ford Motor Company, they didn't want to have a factory in every state. They centralized the manufacturing and then distribution. So what you might call a balkanized monetary system didn't serve the interests of this whole new scale of economy that was emerging. So, in a real nutshell, uh, there was this long debate between who should control the money supply, how do we keep it from, if we give it all to the politicians, we know what they're going to do with the money, and yet the politicians are not willing to give control purely to the merchant class, and so we ended up with the Federal Reserve central bank that was it became operational in 1913. So, the title of this lesson is 100-Year Reboot, and now you can see we're a little over 100 years, and the financial system is getting a real reboot. It's getting a real redesign. So the nature of the Federal Reserve was that it was semi-independent from the political governance, and somehow, again, all these agreements fall back into the fundamental agreement of the ruling class to not use violence against each other directly, but to express that kind of battle through the political system. So money itself has become for the ruling class a kind of weapon or the potential threat to bring people to the negotiating table. But the thing is, just like the kings had no real respect for the serfs, in that era, the early 1900s, the condition of the workers was very poor. Um, and so the notion of a populist movement, the idea of populism is that people who don't necessarily aspire to power, they still aspire to have a decent life. And so it's a power sharing agreement between the ruling class and the general public. And in the US, that led to rise of the union movement, so collective bargaining, so that, because one of the real challenges of being the individual person in a culture without money is that you can't really work the legal system or the political system, and it's very easy for someone with more power to simply steamroll the rights of the people that create wealth for those people. And this is one of the strange, this is one of the real deep issues that we need to resolve as a culture. People call it we look at it when it comes to respect for humans, obviously respect for animals, respect for nature. It's called the crisis of the commons or externalization of costs, right? So now we have, the animal industries exploiting workers, exploiting animals, and they exploit the environment by externalizing the devastation that their industry creates, right? So the devastation is borne by all of us. The attack on the rights of the individual workers, in a way, is borne by our entire culture. And of course, the exploitation of animals is borne by the whole animal society. And how do we remedy that? And because the thing is, it's unlikely that any one individual sets out to do this kind of destruction. These are, you might call, nominal decisions. And I remember my own father. He was an engineer at a company called McDonnell Douglas, which later merged with Boeing after he retired. And McDonnell Douglas was a pioneer in the space program. So he wanted to work in the aerospace industry, and he got hired as an engineer, and he got to play with spaceships. And I'm sure he was really very happy to be doing that. Well, the challenge was that the McDonnell Douglas, after something called the Gemini Project, which was a two-person spaceship in the 60s, people have heard of the Apollo mission. That's what put people on the moon. McDonnell Douglas was not a prime contractor for that project. All of those jobs moved to other places, and my father was left with some very difficult decisions because he could not, there was no potential for him to continue in the space program while still living in St. Louis, which was the headquarters of McDonnell Douglas, St. Louis, Missouri, in the middle of the United States. And bit by bit, in order to make money for the family, he moved into more and more projects that I knew he wasn't very fond of. The last one was a project, basically intercontinental ballistic missiles that were shot out of submarines. So rather than being able to follow his dream, he ended up doing, these were, if you can think back to that era, he made this pragmatic decision. In a lot of ways, we're all doing that every day. It's like the world is so complicated. It's not that easy just to follow our dreams and, be a free agent in our culture. So if you look at your own life, you can see every place, like maybe you got something, you were hungry and you got some food at a store, prepackaged food, and it comes in a plastic box, and there's no recycling bin. So you throw it in the trash, and that's a kind of decision. It's like, okay, I can't change the culture, and I need to, so we make all these decisions. So that's why I founded Vegan Lunch, is so that we could take more collective action with our finances and solve these problems from the financial platform so that people don't have to keep making these kind of choices between their own personal well-being and the well-being of the greater culture. Um, so again, back to the original core topic. So the Federal Reserve was really much more a compromise between the military side and the merchant class, and it was born in an era of renewed populism because of, again, the rise of the corporation, the disparity of wealth, and the abuse of the working class. And now around the world we're kind of in a similar era, oddly, and we're going to look as we continue in this lesson at how the monetary system is changing in the midst of all of these uh, conditions of wealth, untold wealth, and at the same time untold destruction of the environment, animals, and of human beings. Core right to live their own lives, and we're going to see if we can find a solution.